Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm James Woolcock.
And I'm Yuan. Welcome to the programme. Well, here we go again. It's time for another Conservative Party leadership race. I have to say, there's a bit of a feeling of déjà vu about the whole business. The first three names are out of the traps: James Cleverly, Tom Tugendhat and Robert Jenrick. And we're already hearing a few of their pitches.
I've had lots of very kind words from both former colleagues and current colleagues. We want to serve the British people. It is never just about an individual.
I'm very, very clear that all institutions, all treaties must serve the interests of the British people. And, where they do, I'll support them. Where they don't, I won't.
James Cleverly and then Tom Tugendhat making some of their initial pitches. What we do know, James, is this is going to be a very long contest. The winner's not going to be picked until November, well after the party conference.
And those are just a couple of names. Those are the ones who've declared, Ewan. We're going to get quite a few likely more. I mean, Kemi Badenoch hasn't yet declared, so Bra, I'm going to wait to see what happens with her as well. And there are a couple others sort of floating around. But, of course, this feels familiar because it happened just 2 years ago. I vividly remember the great Rishi Sunak versus the almighty Liz Truss, and a summer spent kind of traipsing up and down the UK following debates and hustings. I think there is one big difference about this contest. We and the rest of the world's media followed that contest 2 years ago very closely because whoever won was going to be the next Prime Minister. I'm not so sure there's going to be quite so much sort of nervous attention fixated on this contest.
No, indeed. And I think it probably wouldn't be brutal to say that most people's attentions are focused on a brand new government, which has got a big agenda, which is talking about all the time. So this show and other politics shows, and indeed the public's attention, are on the new government. So this is going to be it's going to be a secondary contest, isn't it? Certainly compared to the last time. It's interesting, going to be the longest leadership election since 2005. That was, if you remember, when David Cameron snuck his way into the job as the underdog when David Davis had long been considered the favourite. It was widely rumoured that time that sitting leader Michael Howard set it up that way so that others could emerge. So that's interesting to see if the long contest this time also changes the result.
See, we're going to get into this a bit later with our guest, Nick Faith, who is an expert on this, but there are big issues around risks around basically having what I'm going to call a B-plot to Conservative politics for the next few months. Because on one hand, you have what is going on in Westminster, where Labour will be trying to attack the Conservative record and saying everything that's gone wrong in the country is the Conservatives' fault. And it becomes more difficult to say that's not true when you have Conservative politicians also saying that things that have gone wrong are other Conservatives' fault.
Yeah, I think this is absolutely a key problem because if you remember the last leadership election, there was terrible blue-on-blue aggression, if you want to call it that. There were loads and loads of slagging off what the government's done, slagging off the other candidates, and that really was a gift to the Labour Party. They were using loads of these quotes in the general election, and I think the party is going to be absolutely desperate to avoid that this time.
Well, so like I said, joining us now is Nick Faith, who is the co-founder of WPI Strategy and an advisory board member for the think tank Onward, whose previous director was an advisor to Rishi Sunak, and Nick was also a former director of comms at Policy Exchange. So, Nick, as I just said there, Labour are already trying to do what, George Osborne famously did and blame the previous government for everything that went wrong under the sun. Is this going to mess up any Conservative defence for the next kind of 3 months or so?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I think the fundamental argument, and it was the same during the election campaign, is quite simply the public aren't listening to what the Conservative Party have got to say. So it almost doesn't really matter right now. The most important thing from the Conservative Party's perspective is to earn the right to be heard again, first by their own members, which obviously is the sort of the key audience for this upcoming leadership contest, and then eventually by the public, who have switched off and, are focusing on their summer holidays.
Nick, for the members of the public who are interested in this, can you just take a step back and just explain how the rules have been changed? Because this is being run in a slightly different way, isn't it? And it's only 4 days until nominations close, which I was rather surprised to hear. But talk us through the process between now and November, if you can.
So this is a very long contest, and there are sort of arguments that have been going around the party as to whether that is a good or a bad thing. I mean, the benefits of a longer contest is you take more considered time to assess the calibre of the candidates, and there will be quite a few candidates appearing over the coming days. The negatives are it sort of enables Labour, I suppose, to have much more of a sort of a free hit, as it were, with a number of things coming down the line, not least some major fiscal events, including a likely a budget, where you won't have a new leader of the opposition elected by then. But you have a situation, and the other issue, I suppose, is that what you touched on at the start of the show is this context of blue on blue attacks, i.e. the candidates sort of going at each other and sort of, I suppose, reaffirming for those members of the public who are watching this and the media who are reporting on this, that the party is still disunited and unruly. And so you have a situation where you've got this long period of time. Over August, the candidates will be touring the country, predominantly going, I suspect, to their local associations, who are the members who will end up voting on the final two candidates. The final two candidates don't get whittled down until the 10th of October. So you have nigh on 3 months between now and then for the candidates to be whittled down to the final two. How it works is after the summer recess, so back in the start of September, you will have a short list of 4 candidates that are taken forward from the 11th of September. And those 4 will have a platform at the party conference, which is at the end of September, to sort of set out their stall, demonstrate their credibility in the eyes of their own parliamentarians and in the eyes of the members and the general public. And then come the 10th of October, you will have various rounds of voting until you get the final 2. And the final 2 will then be up for the members of the party, which are around 100,000 now, and that's whittling down to probably lower than that these days. And they will vote online, and the 2nd of November, you will have the new leader of the Conservative Party. So it's a long process with lots of different stages, which is very confusing.
Now, Nick, you frame this as about regaining trust, and the reason for this long process is to have what might be quite a difficult conversation about why the Conservatives think they lost the election. What do you think are the competing explanations we're going to see here from candidates?
I actually think the candidates will probably be fairly united in terms of the answer to that question. And it's fairly straightforward because it's borne out in all the evidence that's come out from polling after the election, which was the Conservative Party was fundamentally rejected by large swathes of the electorate. I mean, they lost, I think, a quarter of their 2019 vote to Reform. They lost another quarter of their vote to the left, Labour and the Lib Dems. So, they were fundamentally rejected by huge numbers of people. And you had a huge rise of tactical voting because people just wanted the Tories out. And I think every single one of the candidates can fundamentally agree on that. There will therefore be disagreements on potentially the way forward and how you unite the party around an agenda about who you stand for, which parts of the country do you think are winnable for 2029 at the next election, and how do you present a platform which might enable you to win back those lost voters from July this year.
But just on that, I'm sure they can all agree that people wanted the Conservatives out, but I guess my question is, why did they want the Conservatives out? Because you could say, was it a lack of policy delivery? Was it a lack of charisma? Was it the mini-budget by Liz Truss? Was it Boris Johnson and Partygate? Was it a lack of control on immigration? There are so many kind of competing factors, and this is kind of a problem you alluded to. How do you win back, say, people who voted for the Lib Dems and people who defected to Reform? So I guess, which do you think are the biggest kind of drivers of that loss?
Yeah, I mean, all of the above, to be quite honest. I mean, I'd put it down to 3 things, which sort of summarize, hopefully quite neatly, all the various factors you just outlined. Trust. They lost trust amongst swathes of the electorate, and that was for a whole range of reasons. Economic competency, clearly one of them after the disastrous mini-budget with Truss. There was indefensible behaviour that went on with Partygate and Gamblegate, as we got close to the electorate, the things that really cut through, that challenged the integrity of the party. And there was a failure to deliver on promises. They did not deliver on reducing NHS waiting lists. They did not stop the boats. So, you raise the salience of these issues and then you fail to deliver on them. And it's not really a surprise that the public at large reject your offer when it comes to the election.
Being leader of the opposition is famously a tough job, isn't it? They say it's the hardest job in British politics. What do you think the Conservative Party needs from their leader? Is it going to be a leader for 5 years? Is it somebody who just needs to clear up the immediate mess? What are the key qualities you think this person?
I think you absolutely need someone who is a natural leader, someone who is authentic, can communicate, and who has broad appeal to everything we've just talked about. I think if you tried to go down a route where you appeal to one section of the electorate, so a more leading candidate who sort of rejects other elements of the electorate, for example, home counties, small c Conservatives who voted for the Liberal Democrats this time round, you will fail, quite simply. So you need someone who has broad appeal and who can unite the party and offer up, as you say, being leader of the opposition is very different from being prime minister. Almost the policy agenda, whilst it is important, more importantly is actually critiquing the government and demonstrating that you have the ability to lead and to communicate a different way of doing government.
There's an assumption underlying our whole conversation so far, Nick, which is you take, a few blows, you get humiliated in opposition, and then you kind of work your way back to power, which is the normal system of, UK two-party politics. But in this sort of very different system we find ourselves in after that split election result, with so many more medium-sized parties, is there an existential risk here that actually the next leader could make things a lot worse? And the Tories might not find themselves out of power for 5, 10, maybe 15 years, but possibly forever.
Yes, there's an existential threat facing the Conservative Party, which I think is being underplayed right now. I mean, you have a situation where Reform is now the second most popular party in 98 constituencies. So it is not inconceivable that Reform could overtake the Conservatives come 2029. And there is an element where you have Reform has probably swallowed up as much of the Conservative leaning vote as it could possibly have had, and it is now after the Labour vote. And if Labour failed to deliver on what they've set out and what Keir Starmer's set out in the first few weeks of his government, then absolutely you could see Reform taking on numbers of seats across coastal communities, across the northeast, where they could eventually, and it's not inconceivable that by 2029 they become the second largest party. So yeah, absolutely, the Conservative Party is facing an existential threat, and they need to wake up to the fact that it is, this is a different kind of political landscape we live in. And we're seeing what's going on in other countries around the world, not just in the States, but in Europe, where you have the rise of extreme parties on the right and on the left. And if people start rejecting centrist government, and I say centrist in the broadest terms, and I would say Keir Starmer is a centrist, pragmatic politician who respects institutions and wants to deliver things in a traditional way. If he fails to deliver, you could absolutely see a rise of the more extreme elements of party politics that you're seeing elsewhere around the world.
So a massive challenge to all the party, particularly the Conservative Party, picking their new leader. Nick Faith, co-founder of WPI Strategy and advisory board member of think tank Onward. Thanks so much for joining us. James, I thought it very interesting that Nick was saying that the policy agenda is secondary, because we often seem to frame these things in kind of ideological battle terms, don't we? But actually he says that critiquing the government and taking the message out to the country is more important, which I guess makes a lot of sense.
It does, although it's fascinating given the amount of policy Labour are putting through at the moment to see they'll be getting that through effectively unopposed. Anyway, that's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo and our audio engineer was Sean Gostamakia. I'm Yuan Potts.
And I'm James Woolcock. We'll be back with more on Monday. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.